The story begins with someone who has long white hair at the center of what appears to have been a fierce battle. We see that this person is using some kind of magic in the hope of contacting any survivor and asking that this person make at least some noise if they cannot speak. Several glowing circles appear as the being in a white cloak pleads. However, apparently he is the only survivor. In front of him, we see the one who consolidated the demons for the first time, causing humanity to collapse. We see that not even the children were spared. Luckily, the man with white hair was in the right place at the right time to save a baby who was about to be devoured. We see that the child was wrapped in a bright green magic. At the same time, we discover that the demons who came from the demon realm and the White Tower mages who follow the protagonist almost jeopardize the future of humanity. The horn-being charges with its sword at the man with long hair and a white cloak, but ends up losing its head, literally. A young woman with green hair appears and says that on April 28th, she confirmed the death of the high priest. She is Enna Sol plays the last dragon in the world and the observer who records history. Looking away, the young woman says she has good and bad news, so the mage asks her to start with the bad part. The young woman then says that the demon army really invaded the White Tower and wiped out most of the mages. However, the good news is that the Imperial forces arrived earlier than expected and managed to save some of the survivors. With his hand on his chin, the man says that hearing this is a relief and that he does not regret the choice he made because the people he selected are right there in front of him. Edna asks if a man has anything else to say. Looking at his dirty glove, he asks the young woman to take care of his disciples as they are still young and eager. Bowing, the young woman promises she will visit them from time to time. Laughing, a mage asks how a dragon bows its head to a mere human, and Edna then says he deserves the gesture and that the continent and she will not forget the sacrifices made by the heroes of the White Tower. About to leave, the man says that must certainly be a case. Revelian thought that it would be a lie to say he regrets nothing because he was never a good leader. But if somehow he had another opportunity, even if he were called a villain, he would live a selfish life just for his people because that's how he wants to live. We discover that the master mage of the White Tower Edna referred to earlier was the man in the white cloak known as Oscar Sage. We see that the battle eliminated in total 153 mages of various levels, the Tower Master and the High Priest. Sometime later on a sunny day, a black-haired boy is lying in his bed, while another blue-haired young man is by his side. Suddenly, the lying boy wakes up extremely startled, to the point of accidentally hitting the blue-haired boy, who ends up spilling the water he was carrying in a bowl. A little irritated, the young man says he was just going to change the towel, and now he's all soaked, and that the black-haired boy didn't even show any kind of gratitude for the care received. Placing his hand on his chest, the protagonist wonders if he was asleep the whole time. Realizing that the most important thing is that he is not dead as he expected. Even though the high priest struck him directly with the sword, desperate, he asks out loud what is going on. A blond man appears and seems surprised and furious about the boy waking up, stating that he will now make sure to turn him into a human, while the blue-haired boy tries to contain his fury. Catching both of them off guard, the protagonist asks how he is still alive. Very angrily, the blond man asks if he also doesn't find it surprising that he's still breathing. Unbothered by the threats, the boy asks him to explain the current situation in detail since he seems to be a mage. With blood in his eyes, the man asks what he means by explain and about to attack the protagonist, says that he lost control and should be reflecting on his actions and begging for forgiveness. Our boy, seeing a hand coming toward his face, wonders if the mage is an assassin planted by the demons, deciding in that case to activate his wind protection magic to make the attacker's wrist bend like straw, which being low level, should have fought twice before attacking. To the boy's surprise, the magic he activated begins to fade. Looking at his own hands, he wonders what kind of pathetic spell that was. Without any injury, the man praises the protagonist's windshield and says at least he wasn't playing around the whole time, and that he will postpone the disciplinary action for the misappropriation of research funds so he can focus on his recovery. Reflecting, the protagonist states that windshield disappeared the moment he used that magic. And as he realizes his energy is very low, the blue-haired boy asks if he's crazy for attacking Elder Maxon. Unbothered by any of that, Oscar asks what day it is and promptly, the young man says it's September 21st, revealing in turn that the boy has been unconscious for at most 1 day. Confused, the protagonist asks the boy to call Lloyd, Gilly, or Shasha because he wants to hear what happened from one of them. The blue-haired youth then asks why his friend is saying the Tower Master's name so informally, and why he doesn't remember that Lloyd left the White Tower and became a disciple of the Red Tower along with Gilly. Perplexed, our boy realizes the young man in front of him doesn't seem to be lying. Then he asks if, in that case, Sasha, a 5-year-old child, is the master of the White Tower. The young man confirms but asks why he's ignoring 20 years. In his thoughts, Oscar wonders why he's getting so angry at a mere boy. Noticing, for the first time, when looking at his reflection in the window, his current appearance. With wide eyes, he asks himself who that is in front of him. Sometime later, we discover along with the protagonist that 20 years have passed since his death, and that the city has developed a lot during that time, now having cars and lights on public poles. All thanks to the magic engineering revolution. Observing everything from above, the boy says his friends from his previous life would have loved to see all of this. Because back when the world was collapsing, there were many who believed that was the end. But now, his mission is to gather as much information as possible about the owner of his current body. Soon after, the boy discovers his name is Oscar Crucian, and that he was taken in by the White Tower at the age of 10. Being a level 1 mage from a ruined noble family and terrible at using magic, who, under pressure, diverted research funds to buy an illegal elixir, and after drinking it, passed out. All in order to increase his mana capacity even with the risk of never waking up again. Thinking, Oscar Sage concludes that the boy surely passed away after drinking the potion. But to his surprise, he ends up discovering that his new body has too much mana for someone at level 1. Being mostly pure, unrefined mana, he wonders if this is the result of Crucian's reckless act. Suddenly, a very strong blue light starts to radiate from his abdomen. At the same time, something seems to exit from his finger. A drop of black goo ends up dripping to the ground, leaving our boy a little frightened. Upon realizing that apparently the substance is toxic, without understanding anything, he wonders why his current body is poisoned. But giving a brief smile right after, he shows that he now fully understands what is happening, and that the elixir wasn't fake like everyone said. However, his host didn't know there was poison in the vial, which means Crucian didn't die from a mana explosion, but rather from an absurd amount of poison that had a level far too high to have been used to eliminate a mere level 1 mage. So if it weren't for him, no trace would ever have been found. Standing up from the chair, Oscar states he doesn't know who is playing with his soul. But in any case, he received the second chance he so desperately wanted before the end, and he will live his selfish life for his people as he promised, which despite everything is a good start. Holding the elixir, the protagonist also promises that he will avenge Crucian as payment for lending him his body. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Saren, we see someone announcing that there's news from the shop. Annoying, a man in a brown blazer scolds his employee for not addressing him as boss when he approached. After apologizing, the young man informs him that some mage completely destroyed the shop, leaving the man even more furious. The servant then says the mage was asking about the person who sold the elixir and asks if it could have been Oscar Crucian. Calmer, the boss, says no, and concerned, the boy asks if it couldn't have been the White Tower deciding to investigate the case. Again, the man says no because the one who framed Oscar belonged to the White Tower. Someone approaches and asks who would be dumb enough not to remove their identification ring before doing something like that. We see Oscar Sage entering through the door, but the men don't know he isn't Crushing. Thinking to himself, our boy reveals that he tracked the scent left on the vial and was able to discover that many people are involved. The man sitting on the couch asks if it was the boy who destroyed his shop, and he says yes, and that he's very interested in what he and the other young man were talking about, so they can go ahead and continue their conversation. Out of patience, the boss says he had thought about letting him go, but in this case, there's no other choice. He then orders his henchmen to take care of the protagonist, who immediately obeys. With a dark look, Oscar says that if that's the game the man wants to play, he's in. He quickly casts his spell called Wing Cutter on the man, who ends up losing his head, literally. In his thoughts, our boy shows disappointment as he wasn't aiming just for the head. Shocked, the man in the brown blazer screams and grabs his revolver while cursing Oscar. Several bullets fly toward the boy, but he is smiling, saying that this is quite interesting. He then activates his windshield while wondering what principle is being used to produce so much energy. Stunned, the man asks how he stopped the bullets, surprising the boy by discovering what those things are called. He then says that as interesting as bullets are, he will return them for now. Without a bulletproof body, the protagonist's opponent simply takes the attack without being able to do anything. Even wounded, he keeps spewing insults, but Oscar warns that no one will hear anything as he made the room soundproof. Shocked, the man asks how that's possible, and our boy says he used Soundbind. And now he would like the man to cooperate and tell him who set him up. The problem is that the man remains stubborn, and so he ends up getting kicked in the face. From above, Oscar shows admiration at the fact that his opponent would rather keep his pride than his life, and then activates another spell while keeping his foot firmly on the man's face. On the ground, the man starts to scream. The protagonist then says that now that he has channeled the wind into the man's body, he must be feeling immeasurable pain. He then states that he doesn't like torturing others because of the noise. Begging, the man pleads for him to stop and says he'll tell him everything. Deactivating his magic, the protagonist asks him to tell everything he knows about his assassin. With a hand on his neck, the man in the blazer says he was paid to sell the elixir to the boy at a cheap price, and that the person behind it had their face covered by a hood but wore the White Tower's ring. Thinking our boy concludes that it was just a trick to mislead the man. Still in despair, the guy says the mysterious person had a refreshing mint scent. Storing all that information in his mind, the protagonist asks how he planned to deal with the consequences after his death. The man then says he didn't think the White Tower would investigate, giving even more valuable information about the removal of the 4 main magic towers, something Oscar had no idea about. The protagonist says he forgot about that after taking the elixir, and the man then says he'll hand over the documents. Standing up, the man in the brown outfit walks over to the dresser and returns with several folders stating that they contain all the relevant documents. Oscar decides to start with the folder containing information on the White Tower, which says that after his sacrifice, among all the magic towers, the White Tower produced the worst results in the previous year. Worried, our boy wonders how the White Tower has no advanced magic if he asked Edna to take care of it. He then asked the man to tell him the current situation of the 4 main magic towers. We discover that the Yellow Tower of the East, which controls lightning, ushered in the great era of magic engineering, while the Blue Tower of the South contributed to clean water, agriculture, and potion businesses. Meanwhile, the Red Tower of the West, which salutes the desert, joined with the militants and helped with monster subjugation missions. Our boy then asks about the White Tower. The man says that it only makes deliveries, leaving him in shock because he never imagined something like that would happen. Oscar decides to ask if the man means item deliveries, and he confirms saying the tower has wind knights who can fly, revealing that the situation is far worse than the protagonist imagined. For in the past, the mages of the White Tower soared through the skies and ruled them, being compared to dragons and eagles. With his hand on his face, the boy asks who is responsible for this, and the man says, as far as he knows, it was the current master of the place, making the protagonist realize that it's one of his former disciples. Changing the subject, he asks why the Blue Tower is taking on other types of business besides potions. The man then says it's because that tower specifically has a monopoly on the potion market. With that, they focused on selling clean water at a high price and bringing rain to dry areas. Not understanding, the protagonist questions the reason for selling clean water and learns that it's a new trend among the rich. Irritated, he says the mages of the Blue Tower are acting like clowns just to make more money. Returning to the documents, the boy discovers that the White Night Festival is the last chance for the White Tower to prove its worth. The problem is that the event will happen in only 7 months. Suddenly, the man says something's wrong with his body, making Oscar wonder if he should save him because of the useful information he provided. Reading the documents about the Yellow Tower, he uncovers numerous crimes committed there and is left speechless. Standing up, he says the man is practically a piece of filth with legs, showing that he chose not to save him, stylingly hoping that the man will be a good person in his next life. The next morning at the White Tower, we see Oscar arriving in his quarters completely exhausted. Sitting in his armchair, he can't believe he's so tired just from using a few basic spells, and he wonders if in his current state he'll be able to use that magic, the one that made him the greatest mage in human history, called Wind Argive. Trying to use the spell, the boy notices that it dissipates and concludes that he still can't use it and that he needs a complete overview of his body's current condition through a magical scan, all while continuing to study information about Oscar Crushen. Since his memories are a mess, and it's crucial to know everything about his host if he wants to save that body. We discover that the young man who died is the heir of Count Crushen and the sole survivor of a disastrous fire. The boy's power was recognized early on by mages to the point that fights broke out over his recruitment. Thus, during his 6 years, he attended magic college. He earned nothing but high grades, and through the publication of a thesis, proved to everyone that he truly was a genius. However, he never rose past level 1 and lived quite unhappily, all due to his mana deficiency syndrome, which prevented him from becoming a great mage. Our protagonist's eyes widen as he discovers his host had a disease, while thinking that now everything makes sense. Suddenly, he notices the scan has finished, choosing to view the results immediately, already expecting the worst. But to his great surprise, the so-called mana deficiency syndrome was not identified, and all the boy's problems occurred because someone had sealed his magic circuit. We discover that the syndrome is a disease in which one cannot circulate or accumulate magic, and that the number of physical circuits a mage has determines their level. However, Krushen's circumstances are different since his physical circuit wasn't naturally warped but was deliberately bound by someone. In his thoughts, the protagonist wonders how the boy didn't realize he didn't have the syndrome if he was a genius. He then says it would have been nice if the boy had kept a diary because according to Frank, the young man was an alcoholic, but now he doesn't know if that was a deliberately created persona. In case Krushen had discovered that his circuit had been blocked on purpose and decided to act like a playboy and chose the illegal elixir simply because he couldn't trust anyone, meaning, therefore, to undo the chains that bound him on his own. Placing several books on the table, Oscar states that he will be able to untie the knot. Suddenly, something catches his attention, a book about the reinterpretation of basic magic. Determined not to waste time, the protagonist begins flipping through the pages and discovers various notes about spells, including Wind Cutter, Windshield, and the Gun spell. Oscar realizes that those concepts are similar to how he himself casts spells, and that in this book are several spells his host created from scratch, which means that even without being able to use magic himself, the boy conducted experiments in his own mind. After more time reading, our boy concludes that his way of interpreting magical theory is similar to Krushen's, and that the young man never gave up on magic or worked harder than everyone else because it was his passion. Moreover, the boy wrote a dedication in the book, hoping that his notes would ride the faintest wind toward the White Tower, revealing that he knew exactly what he was doing when he took the elixir. His only obstacle was having to do everything alone. Thus, the mage Oscar Krushen was a young man who never succeeded due to his cruel fate and walked silently down a lonely path. After reading everything, the protagonist decides to sit on the couch, swearing then that in the name of the 17th Master of the Magic Tower, he will undo the knot the boy was never able to untie and make all those who cruelly broke Krushen's wings pay for their actions. Suddenly, we see another place. Walking around a greenhouse, Oscar wonders why he's doing that. Because the last thing he remembers is falling asleep after exhausting himself trying to undo the knot in the physical circuit. Suddenly, someone calling for Master catches his attention. As he approaches, the protagonist sees himself together with 3 children, quickly realizing that this is happening because of the dream curse cast by the Viscount of Nightmares, which makes him return to the past every time he falls asleep. Meaning, curse is tied to his soul, not to his physical body as he previously thought. Watching the scene, the boy wonders if he's lucky since his dreams about his students weren't corrupted. Giving his lesson, Sage says that although magic may look the same physically, it is categorized into 4 types. Little Lloyd asks if the White Tower pursues the harmonization type, and smiling, the protagonist confirms. Sasha then asks if each magic tower has a preferred magic type, and Oscar confirms, explaining that this is why towers seek the magic types that best suit them. Gilead raises his hand and says he'd like to have acceleration type magic because slow things are boring. The little girl then asks how they find out what type of magic they were born with. Oscar says it's simpler than she thinks and asks the girl to cast the magic he drew in front of her. Using her index finger, Sasha realizes something is happening. Smiling, the protagonist says that this spell isn't very fast nor lethal, but rather balanced, therefore of the harmonic type, which makes the redhead happy as she shares the same magic type as her master. The other 2 boys say they'd like to take the test too. Quickly, the protagonist says Gilead's magic is of the acceleration type, while Lloyd's is of the special type. The boy asks if it's possible to change that, and Oscar reveals that special types are rare, and only 0.2% of mages have them. Still, the little one says he'd prefer to be balanced like him. The mage then wonders what he should do now, since he was planning to give the boy the most one-on-one lessons possible because of his type. Hearing that makes Lloyd start to change his mind, but first he asks if it's true. Confirming, the protagonist says that special-type mages have a harder time improving without a proper teacher. That's all the little one needed to hear. After that, they make a pinky promise. Now, however, boy can't stop thinking about how that child, nicknamed the Man of Promise, is a little bastard. While feeling bad because despite everything back then, Lloyd was just a child. Suddenly, a noise from a speaker box wakes Oscar. A voice says this is a broadcast room announcement, and the protagonist's name begins echoing throughout the place as the person asks him to report to Laboratory 4202. Heading to the elevator, the boy thinks that he still has 8 physical circuits left to unlock, revealing then that during the process, he gained 2 mana circuit lines and reached level 2. Upon entering a room, a man asks how the boy is feeling as Frank said his memories were returning. Approaching, Oscar says they are. As he stares at Maxim Bisk, 45 years old elder of the White Tower, we discover that the man was a junior who joined the tower many years after Sage and is a very honest person, who always followed him around calling him senior and later master of the Magic Tower, which he found endearing. Lost in his thoughts, the protagonist doesn't even notice that he's smiling, which leads Maxim to ask the reason for that expression. While saying he received a report that the head of the Gordon family and the head of enforcement were murdered, Oscar denies any involvement in the acts, but says he knows the reason it happened, that both had tried to kill him. Handing over the yellow folder, the protagonist says the elixir was poisoned and that inside are the commission fee and the book explaining everything. Because after discovering the crimes, he became someone that needed to be silenced. Maxim says that indeed the money looks legitimate. Oscar then says that the report book contains the content of a contract killing. The man affirms that in that case, he will let the incident go and thanks him. The protagonist asks if he can request a favor. He then reveals that he'd like to meet the master of the magic tower. The elder says that won't be difficult as mages frequently discuss magic with her. However, he'll only be able to meet her in 6 months. Worried and intrigued with the upcoming festival, our boy asks why. Maxim says the young woman is away on business to handle an important commission since the High Mage is currently absent. Oscar then asks what level the Tower Master is. Without hesitation, the man reveals she's a level 7 mage. In his thoughts, our boy senses something is off, as Sasha should have at least reached level 8 by now. Returning to the report, the elder says the cross-section of the corpse was clean and asks if the boy has resumed using offensive magic. Lying Oscar says he trains while he thinks. The man then says in that case he's free to go. The protagonist leaves the room, but someone else seems to be about to enter. It's the vice master of the magic tower who says he came to ask Maxim not to be too hard on the boy who just left. The elder says he must reprimand the youth to keep him from getting into trouble. Hamel says he understands but worries about him, because even if it's basic magic, it couldn't have been perfected so quickly, meaning Oscar is secretly studying. Smiling, the man says the boy is really sneaky. Wrapping up the matter, the vice master says they need to head to the elders' meeting where Elder Fidelina is waiting. Far from there on the 10th floor, the protagonist decides to visit the place where he used to teach his students, which now seems to be empty. Suddenly, an old man approaches and seems happy to see Oscar. He is Wilter, the manager of the Magic Tower facilities. Noticing the boy doesn't remember him, the man says that apparently the rumors were true. Concerned, the protagonist asks how far the news about his memory has spread and why the man called him young Sir Oscar. Smiling, Wilter says he was working there while the former master of the Magic Tower was still alive and that the man was the great Sir Oscar. Smiling, our boy says he liked that distinction and will use it too. The old man then says he would love to keep being the boy's conversation partner, but he will soon be leaving the tower. Since he has already served 3 masters during his time there, unlike his co-workers, he's the only one who remains. The only reason he endured for so long was what the former master said during his inauguration ceremony, that everyone who lives there is necessary. Thus, he began working believing he was a true member of the White Tower. Oscar then says the former master was definitely serious. Wilter then says that's precisely why he is quitting, leaving the protagonist quite confused. Explaining, the man says that, as he may know, the White Tower is not doing well and finances aren't what they used to be, and that next month he will complete 42 years working there. Oscar asks if it's because of the long service award. We discover that, in addition to a medal, those who work in the tower for 40 years receive 200,000 CNOs. Shaking his head, Walter says the White Tower no longer has the luxury to pay such a reward because to do so, many lives would have to be put at risk, something he cannot accept as that place is his second hometown. In his thoughts, our boy reveals he had no idea the situation was that bad, and that he thought the Blue Tower was being extravagant just for profit. But now who is he to criticize the work of others who became the greatest in history through hard work, while he himself has only titles that mean nothing since they go fund the rewards deserved by others. Suddenly, the old man gets Oscar's attention. Noticing Oscar clenching his fist tightly, the old man asks why he's doing that. Realizing he's injured his own hands, the protagonist asks when Wilter plans to leave. The man replies, in 2 weeks. After bandaging the boy's wound, he tells him to go see the nurse for some medication. Oscar then says he hopes the man will continue being his conversation companion because he won't need to leave, as he will make sure of his stay once he finds a way to make a lot of money. After that conversation, we see the protagonist sitting at his desk wondering how he'll fulfill what he promised, since his options are research, lectures, and commissions, but the money from those takes time to come in. So in needing a business that brings in fast money, he considers going into the potion trade. Suddenly, something in the newspaper catches his attention and leaves him visibly surprised. Far from there, in the vice master's office, a woman with a large hat says she can't ignore Aldo this time. This is Fidelina, elder of the White Tower in charge of finances, who can't believe Maxim agrees with the situation. Shouting, woman claims that stealing is a habit that only gets worse, but the man says she needn't worry. After all, there's not much left to steal from the tower. Furious, Fidelina demands he stop contradicting her and just throw the culprit into isolation. Impatient with the argument, Hamel says isolation is too harsh a punishment as it would amount to nothing more than torture for a child. Instead, he suggests the boy repay triple the amount of the stolen research funds personally. Dissatisfied, the woman says they're low on funds and need to make a quick decision, like selling the equipment from the potion production chamber since it's a facility that's not used much anymore. However, the Vice Master says he can't allow that, as that chamber is where mages gather to study magic and share knowledge, and they can't just sell off the future to satisfy today's hunger. Pessimistically, Fidelina asks if they even have a future anymore since they've already waited 20 years. Hearing then enrages Maxim. Unfazed, the woman asks Hamel to support her proposal, arguing that even if they were a genius capable of saving the tower, that person wouldn't come to them. Before the elder can respond, there's a knock at the door, catching everyone by surprise. The Vice Master invites the visitor in. It's Oscar, who politely introduces himself and greets the three. Approaching, the boy says he has a suggestion, but needs permission to start a business. Furious, Fidelina says it's ridiculous to ask such a thing after embezzling research funds just days ago. Ignoring her, the protagonist says he found something in the newspaper. Property 27 is being shut down due to an influenza outbreak. Hamel says he's heard about it and that people are calling it Cadence flu. But since the vaccine formula was lost 20 years ago, there's not much that can be done. Our boy says the Blue Tower also failed to create the antidote, and so he would like to beg in, selling vaccines for the flu to revive the White Tower's monopoly over that market. Laughing, the woman in the hat says it's not even worth listening to him, as magical towers and pharmaceutical companies have invested tons of money and manpower to no avail. But a 20-year-old boy claims he can do it. Turning, the protagonist says she might be right, but she's forgetting that he is a genius. Hearing that makes Fidelina even angrier to a point that veins pop near her eye. Yelling, she asks how he can say something like that after stealing 25,000 senos to buy an illegal elixir, which only shows his total ignorance when it comes to money. Hamel cuts in, stating that Oscar is here to propose an official investment opportunity, so such rudeness is uncalled for. Calming down, the woman apologizes. In his thoughts, the protagonist finally understands that Fidelina hates him because she's the tower's treasure. Even so, he asked the Vice Master to consider his request, thinking to himself that he's a different person now. The man asked why he's so sure it's that particular flu. Without hesitation, the boy tells him to check page 2 of the newspaper, where it states that Archbishop Baldwin suddenly changed plans during a pilgrimage and will stay in Siren for a month. We learned that the man belongs to the Altera order devoted to Mother Earth, and the 7 archbishops are meant to be the most virtuous. But the reality is quite different, since to become a cardinal, the second in power of the order, a lot of campaign funds are required. Thus, it is permitted that they stay up to a month in a city, and for that, they need money coming from nobles and merchants. And since Siren is getting smaller and smaller, it's just a matter of putting 2 and 2 together. Maxim says the boy is right, but he thought the Archbishop's stop was just to ask for prayers and blessings. Our boy says that's why it's strange after all. Why ask for prayers and blessings for an arid land, especially with the pilgrimage route of the El Terra Order members already chosen, because he knows that the Archbishop stayed in Nox for a month before coming to Siren, and will also stay in Most for the same amount of time. All to delay the visit to Vince as much as possible, even though it's a city present on the defined route. Since if an incident occurs during the pilgrimage, it's basically a death sentence for an archbishop who wants to become a cardinal. The blonde man then says that in that case, the archbishop knew about the flu and is buying time until the situation is resolved. Phialina states that the boy is indeed good at analysis as expected from a theory mage. Hamel says he understands what Oscar is saying. However, he can't officially sponsor him since that would hinder the funding of other spells. But he would like to invest his personal money in the boy's business. Hearing this leaves the woman in the hat shocked, but the Vice Master tells her it's okay. Then he asks Oscar if 30,000 sinners is enough. In his thoughts, the protagonist reveals it's not even close. After the meeting, we see Oscar in the potion production chamber, determined to proceed with Plan B, which is to make a sample of the vaccine with the money he received to get more from the Archbishop, since it's better to take money from someone who is desperate. Then Oscar states that now it's time to heat things up. Sometime later, we see the boy observing a red liquid inside a flask. Transferring the substance to another place, he says the time has come. And taking off his protective glasses, he shows satisfaction with what he created, stating that, as they say, a true master always keeps his class. The blue-beard boy approaches, carrying several bags and shouting that his back is going to break, but that he got all the necessary medicinal herbs, asking for something to drink right after. The protagonist says he has a fatigue recovery potion and gives it to the young man, who thanks him. After drinking it, he says the potion was tasty and warm and asks if the boy just made it. Looking at the herbs, Oscar says yes, and the boy then says he picked the best ingredients. Smiling, our boy says his friend should become a merchant because of his good eye. The young man then says that's his plan for when the tower breaks, but ends up getting a flick on the head from Oscar, who says he couldn't help it. With a hand on his head, the young man asks what he needs to do now since Fidelina ordered him to help the protagonist. Our boy then states that they can start by moving the ingredients, even though deep down he knows he doesn't need an assistant. In his thoughts, he says the White Tower is full of talented but problematic kids, who, if they came together, would greatly contribute to the tower's strengthening, and one of those people is Frank Sirius. The blue-haired boy then asks if the things he bought aren't poisonous. We find out he's talking about black lilies of the valley, red camellias, ghost mushrooms, and merva. Our boy says that just because the items are poisonous doesn't mean they can't be used as medicine after certain procedures, such as, for example, boiling the herbs for about 12 hours, the only problem being that the nutrients also go away. Oscar then asks if Frank knows a dish called dumplings used to make steamed dumplings. The young man says he does, and the protagonist then says that with that dish, it's possible to remove the poison from the herbs and retain the nutrients. Shocked, the boy says that, in that case, monopolizing the potion market should be possible. Our boy agrees, and after some time we see that the ingredients are softened, which makes detoxification easier. Activating his air-draining magic, the protagonist begins the process, creating a cloud of pink steam while saying that now, it's just a matter of extracting the toxins from that smoke. Focused, he asks Frank to pay attention. After separating the toxin, the boy states that the rest of the steam is clean, so he just needs to mix everything in the right proportion, resulting in the cure of the Cadena flu. Frank stands with his mouth wide open, but Oscar says it's time for him to try. Thinking to himself, the boy reveals that he can't use different types of magic at the same time, but he can't say that to the protagonist. Observing everything, the black-haired mage notices that the boy's mana control seems unstable, but not bad. However, that's all. Unable to complete the process, Frank asks if the boy is teasing him, since it's necessary to be at level 4 or 5 to do that, but he's still at level 3. The protagonist then says the boy should think of the process as configuring parts in his mind, where on the left side, he'll use Magic A, and on the right side, Magic B. Asking Frank to try again, our boy says he has nothing to lose. Finally, the process seems to start working, leaving the boy impressed because now he has learned how to perform a dual cast, which wasn't even that hard. Confused, Frank asks why no one ever taught him that technique, and Oscar says it's because those at the top are greedy, revealing his thoughts that it's tradition not to teach a technique that took a lot of effort to newcomers for free. However, on the battlefield, that becomes an obstacle since surviving depends on sharing techniques, which means that now the White Tower needs interactive teaching and knowledge exchange. Smiling, Oscar says the boy is very talented as he didn't expect him to get it on the first try. Frank says it's because he explained it so well, but that there are so many ingredients missing, and he needs to start preparing them. Hearing this makes the protagonist proud of his work. A few hours later, we see 514 bottles ready, and the blue-haired boy on the floor completely exhausted. Suddenly, Maxim enters the room, warning that they have a problem. Because the Blue Tower confirmed a visit to Surin an hour ago, intending to meet with Archbishop Baldwin, which means they're late, thinking the protagonist says that apparently the Archbishop had a plan. Worried, the elder says that if the pharmaceutical company gets the contract, their medicine will become useless. But consoling Frank, he says there are times in life when you just get unlucky. Oscar then says it's not over yet because if he remembers correctly, the Cadena flu is classified as a rank B disaster. Therefore, there's something they can try. Meanwhile, in a hotel in the city of Surin, we see someone telling the Archbishop that the guests have arrived. Sipping tea, Baldwin says they may come in. More remain, level 5 mage from the Blue Tower, and Neil Bryan, general director of the pharmaceutical company Newtech, appear. Pointing to the sofa, the Archbishop tells them to sit down, then asks how the production of the flu medicine is going. Smiling, Maine says everything is going well. The man then asks for the estimated delivery date, learning that only the clinical trial phase is left. Neil then says that if they get good results, they'll receive approval from the Imperial Food and Drug Administration. However, the other mage says that, as the Archbishop must know, trials don't end in a day or two. but they promise to finish in 6 months, which shocks Baldwin. Angrily, the man states that he needs to go to Vince in 4 months. Suddenly, someone says another mage is requesting to enter. The Archbishop orders them to let him in while asking Maine why he didn't say more people were coming. But the boy says no one else is accompanying them. We see Boots entering the room, and we discover the person is Oscar, who, after giving a greeting, states that he is there to make an offer. Surprised, the Archbishop asks what brings a mage from the White Tower there. Our boy then says he would like to speak about selling the cure for the Cadena flu. Upon hearing that the other two are there for the same reason, the boy asks if he arrived too late. Baldwin says no, since the Blue Tower's group is still not ready. Oscar then says that, in that case, the White Tower is. Amnoid Maine says the boy is lying because his tower has neither money nor technology. The Archbishop asks for the protagonist's last name, which he promptly gives, and then asks if he is telling the truth. Placing a small box on the table, the boy says he wouldn't dare lie to an Archbishop of the Order of El Terra. That's why he brought a sample. Smiling, the man asks how many doses and buy when the White Tower could produce more. Then scolds the Blue Tower mage who had started yelling at him. Nervously, Maine says that, in that case, it's alright, and he asked the protagonist if he obtained approval from the Empire's FDA. Our boy says no. Smiling, the young man says that, as he expected, the situation of the White Tower is no different from his own tower, and that the vaccines will be produced as soon as authorization is granted. In the end, he asks the Archbishop to carefully consider which tower he will close the deal with. Without any fear, Oscar says it's interesting to hear the young man speak as if the Blue Tower had a grand legacy, especially in front of a mage from the White Tower. Hearing this ends up irritating Moira, who orders the boy to take back what he said. Ignoring it, the protagonist asks which tower was established first according to history, and that the 5-year difference is a gap that the masters of the Blue Tower won't be able to fill even in 10,000 years, since it was the White Tower that held the monopoly of the potion market just 20 years ago. The boy from the other tower then says that no one cares about the past. Our boy then asks if that's really the case, or if that's just his way of thinking, while Maine and Neil wonder what kind of aura that is. Ending the conversation, the protagonist says that, in that case, he'll have to make the mage remember. Suddenly, someone enters the room stating that there's an urgent call from the Lord of the City of Vince. Baldwin answers, and the man on the other end thanks him for his immeasurable kindness for sending the cure for the Cadena flu to his land, because the elder from the White Tower informed him that the Archbishop had prepared it with them in secret, and that those who took the vaccine were cured in just a few hours, so he wanted to thank him. Pretending that he actually did something, the man asks if there were any side effects, but the Lord says no, and that he would like to know when the second batch will be available, since the elder from the White Tower said it depended on the Archbishop. Smiling, Baldwin says you will send the second batch as soon as it's ready, which shouldn't take long. With the call ended, the man asks if that was Oscar's doing and confirms. Furious, Maine says that this goes against FDA laws and that the boy must be punished. The protagonist asks if he even knows anything about wartime law, but the young man orders him not to change the subject. In his thoughts, the protagonist concludes that the last 20 years must have been very peaceful since no one remembers anymore. Very patiently, he explains that the deadliest weapon during the war against the demons was a pandemic, because even with mages producing medicine quickly, it took too long for the FDA to approve them. That's why the king passed a law stating that treatments for the wounded during wartime were considered special treatments, not being affected by imperial laws, to which Maine rebuts that they are not at war at the moment. The protagonist then says there are 3 cases in which a situation is considered war. 1, when it's between nations, another, in the case of a revolution, and the last, when a disaster of Class B or higher occurs. Since the Cadena flu falls into the last category, there's no need to follow FDA laws. Neil interrupts and tells the Archbishop that if the White Tower can do it, then the Blue Tower can too, so they'll send their treatment to Vince. However, Baldwin states that the race ended the moment the White Tower's treatment arrived in the city. And since the local lord believes he was involved, he can't just say it wasn't true. Insisting, Moore says that in that case, he will lower the price of the vaccines. Furious, the Archbishop asks how he dares try to buy his image with money, and that he doesn't want to hear another word, so the two of them come to his office. Maine gets up, fists clenched, and passing by Oscar, says he'll make the boy pay for this, while the protagonist wonders if he has a villain's phrasebook. Smiling, our boy simply says he's already registered the patent for the treatment and the vaccine at the palace. So if he wants to sell the Blue Tower's version, he'll have to pay royalties to the White Tower or throw it all away, making the mage even more furious, who storms out of the room red with rage. Being polite, Neil properly bids farewell to the Archbishop and greets the protagonist as he passes him. But it's in that moment that Oscar notices the man has a unique scent, very refreshing, reminiscent of mint, which means that the one responsible for Krushin's death just walked out of the room. Even in silence, we can see that the discovery shocked the protagonist. However, Baldwin lets out a laugh and tells him to sit so they can proceed with the negotiations. Getting straight to the point, the man asks the boy what the price will be since the Blue Tower was asking for 2 million chinos. Smiling, our boy says that if they wanted 2, the White Tower will want just 5 million. The Archbishop lets out a laugh to hide that he found it expensive while asking if the boy is serious. A few hours later at the White Tower, Fidelina is shocked to see a check full of zeros right in front of her. We discover that Oscar secured 10 million senos. Hugging the boy, the woman says she knew he could do it, just like Maxim, who says he believed in him from the start. Surprised, Hamel asks how that happened because the Archbishop wouldn't give that much money. Our boy then says there were additional charges. In this case, advertising fees. We find out that the boy charged to make an official announcement from the White Tower saying that the Archbishop received a revelation about the flu outbreak, which sped up the preparation of the antidotes. The man liked the idea and decided to pay 1 million chinos for a contract in exchange for vaccine delivery by next week. Holding the check, the elder says it's amazing and that the boy paid back 400 times what he had embezzled. Thus, disciplinary actions come to an end, and a thrilled Fidelina agrees. Oscar then says he now needs to gather level 4 mages or higher as quickly as possible. Hamel says he'll take care of it, then asks the woman in the hat to put an announcement inside the magic tower to inform that the potion lab is looking for level 4 or higher mages and that participants will be paid. A few hours later, we see mages gathered and learned that besides payment, a meat-based meal was offered. Frank and Oscar finally arrive at the location. Without hesitation, our boy calls everyone's attention. However, no one seems to listen. Impatient, he decides to whistle using his sound-linking magic, causing everyone to cover their ears from the noise while asking what that sound is. Our boy then says that everyone was called there to produce vaccines for the Cadena flu. Since he's considered a genius, the other mages wonder why the boy is asking for help. Oscar overhears and widens his eyes. He asks Frank why those people don't like him, and the boy tells him to think about his recent actions. Like, for example, wasting the tower's resources without conducting any research and using the money to get drunk. Suddenly, a mage approaches and asks how they'll make the medicine if the White Tower's methods were lost. Oscar says he recovered everything, leaving everyone shocked, including the young blonde woman who asks if the antidote's effects were verified. Confirming, the protagonist reveals that a contract was also signed. The young woman then says the tower must have received a fortune, then questions why the boy trusts them enough to share such valuable information. Being honest, the protagonist says he doesn't know why they're still in the White Tower. Annoyed, the blonde mage asks if that's how someone who needs help should act, saying she just wasted her time coming there, and that she doesn't know what the great genius meant by saying that, but no one deserves to hear it. However, our boy says he knows exactly what each of them gave up for the White Tower, making the young woman stop walking and turn back. The boy then says that she is Lena White, level 5 mage, who rejected all offers to join other corporations. Then speaks about Haruk Dryan, who also turned down a royal mage position, and Deckard Reen, who refused an instructor role. About Sophia Rose, Oscar says the young woman declined an offer to go to the Gold Tower despite being very talented in creative alchemy. He then states that had a similar offer reached him, he doesn't know if he would have turned it down, but none of them abandoned the White Tower. Surprised, Lena asks if the elders knew about the recruitment meetings. The protagonist says yes, but they had no choice but to pretend they didn't so as not to overburden them. Since the White Tower is going through its coldest winter ever, and in this situation, all of them could have gone somewhere warmer but chose to stay in the cold. So if he, as a mage, can't trust them, he can't trust anyone. But none of them want to participate, then he and the other low-level mage beside him will have a lot of work to do. Frank asks if the boy is talking about him, while Oscar tells him to come closer to start working. Making a dramatic shove, the protagonist puts on his protective glasses. Suddenly, Lena steps forward, as do the others, who ask where they should start. The blue-haired boy says he never imagined Oscar would convince anyone with just his words. Our boy smiles and, turning serious again, informs everyone that the meat won't be pork, but beef. Hearing that, everyone screams and celebrates. After that, we learn that the vaccines and antidotes were successfully created. A week passes since that day, and we see Oscar walking through the greenhouse bumping into a strange-looking leaf, concluding it can only be Wilter's doing. He must be back. Sitting in a chair, the protagonist decides to read the newspaper. He discovers that the territory of Vince has announced the end of the pandemic. Additionally, we see that Oscar has been nominated for the Peace Prize. Smiling, he says everything is going as planned. Suddenly, Frank appears shouting his name to announce that the vaccine orders keep coming in from everywhere, even from the Imperial family. The protagonist says that if they care about their lives, of course, they would want the vaccines. Stopping the celebration, the blue-haired boy asks who will buy the vaccines after everything is over. Oscar then says he doesn't need to worry about money because he prepared a potion that will always be in demand. Seeing the boy's greed, our protagonist says the potions being sold are low and mid-rank because it's not yet time to create the star-tier potion, which is said to bring the dead back to life. In his thoughts, the protagonist states that he won't do that just yet because he needs to first strengthen the White Tower, then asks Frank to gather materials for the other tasks, like lantus leaves and sea and stems. Shocked, the boy says those ingredients will be hard to find because it's been a while since the herb fields that grew those plants were submerged. Sometime later, we see that Oscar decided to go see it with his own eyes and chooses to bring Frank along. Frustrated, the boy asks if it was really necessary to walk all the way to a place the carriage couldn't reach. The protagonist then tells the young mage to relax. They only have 10 miles left, only to discover that this unit of distance hasn't been used in ages, leaving Frank confused. Mouth agape, our boy wonders if they got rid of pounds too, which even though harder made calculations more fun. Suddenly, the blue-haired boy says he sees the entrance. The two approach a cabin. Through the crack of a door, a man with a dark gaze asks if the boys walked all the way there. Frank says yes because the carriage only goes to the entrance. Suddenly, other carriages begin to arrive, showing that this isn't true. And in one of them, a man in a white suit and glasses asks if the man in the house is interested in selling his land. The gray-haired, bearded man opens the door, saying he wouldn't sell his land even if they offered him the castle of Misrillo. Dvorpol then says that playing hard to get is only cute at first. If he dies, no one will keep the land. Annoyed, Ivan says he's fine with that as long as it goes to no one. Being persistent, the man in the white suit says he'd better sell soon before the land's value drops when the factories move in. Unbothered, Ivan says that as long as he's around, no factory will be built. With nothing else to do, Powell says that in that case, he'll leave. And before getting into his car, he says he stepped on some herbs on the way in. So there's the money to cover the damage. After tossing a bundle of cash, a man drives off, waving. In the car, he asks his men with the White Tower mages seen next to Ivan wanted there. Upon learning that the tower made a fortune selling vaccines, Powell becomes very interested, even more after hearing the total amount. Suddenly, he smacks the driver with the newspaper, then asks why he's only hearing about this now. In his thoughts, the businessman declares that he can't let Ivan get support from the White Tower. If that happens, he'll never sell the land. Turning to the back of the car, he asks another man in his suit if he can hire the same mercenaries as last time. When his henchman objects, he hits him with the newspaper, saying all they need to do is kill Ivan and report him missing. The man then asks what will happen if the White Tower mages decide to stay at the herb farm. Poe says they can be eliminated too. After all, what's the worst that could happen? Since there are now only 3 magic towers because the White Tower went bankrupt. Later, we see Frank lying in the grass, saying that Ivan is a good person since he let them stay and even fed them. Stargazing, Oscar agrees. We go back to moments earlier when the old man told them they should sleep there, as leaving at that hour could be dangerous. Curious, the protagonist asks how he's managed to hold out for so long. The man then says that Pole is actually the one at a disadvantage, because he is the one who is a recognized cultural asset in herb cultivation. And for that reason, he receives protection from the Imperial family. Our boy then says that if he had sold the land, he'd have made a fortune. Ivan replies that the boy is asking something obvious. He doesn't sell his land because he loves it. It's been his home since birth and will be until his final breath. Back in the present, Frank says it was kind of cute how Ivan got embarrassed and ran back inside. Changing the subject, the young man says the stars out there are so bright that he feels envious. He always wonders what it's like to live such a brilliant life, something a genius like Oscar must understand. Our boy replies that his friend is very talented too. Frank thanks him but says those are just empty words. The protagonist disagrees. He's not the type to give empty compliments in the first place. And looking at him reveals that he doesn't understand why Krushin said the boy was problematic. Looking back, the sky, he says that you used to be able to see stars in the middle of Surin, which is no longer possible due to public lighting. Intrigued, Frank says that was a long time ago, and then asks if it's really possible to revive the city's herb industry. Smiling, Oscar says he believes so, but that they'll need to discuss the details with Ivan the next day. Suddenly, something catches the protagonist's attention, and he quickly turns around, startling the blue-haired boy. Our boy then says they have company, and in his thoughts confirms that since Frank didn't sense it, the group must not have good intentions. Telling the boy to get up, he says they need to prepare to welcome their guests. We see a green-haired boy running, complaining about Dvorpol's orders. Beside him, an old man says he doesn't care about the consequences, money rules. Another figure approaches and tells them both to shut up and stay sharp. It's Jack, a member of the gunslinger gang, who says he knows a mage might be nearby. The green-haired boy asks if he should go inside the house since given how quiet it is, Ivan must already be asleep, which would make the mission even easier. Looking around, he notices no mage's president gets annoyed. He wanted to fight. Suddenly, something makes him spin around. We see Oscar's hand conjuring a spell called Wind Bullet, which hits the boy's head instantly. Getting out from under the sheets, our boy says that spell really is useful, then reveals that it was Krushin who wrote it. Walking out the door, the protagonist says now only 3 are left. Suddenly, his eyes widen. Realizing there are actually only 2 left, Jack asks what he did to Max. Making a silence gesture, the protagonist says the guy is sleeping and probably won't wake up anytime soon. Not to say he's in an eternal sleep. The old man curses Oscar, while the red-haired one demands Evan's location in exchange for sparing them a counterattack. Surprised that his enemies aren't falling for provocation, our boy simply tells the dude to feel the emotions they're suppressing. Accepting the challenge, Jack orders the old man to finish the boy. He obeys instantly. But with a snap of his fingers, the protagonist manages to defend himself, making the old man smile, impressed by his speed. Even so, the opponent keeps attacking, claiming that the boy didn't know he didn't have just one weapon. What a shame. Ready to defend again, Oscar says the fight ends here, even if it's a drag. More than he expected, we see the old man trying to block the bullets fired by our boy while thinking that it's unbelievable the kid isn't rattled even after being caught off guard, and worse, still dares to shoot with finesse. Mocking the protagonist says the man's weapon isn't unique or even that new. Suddenly, a strike cuts him off and forces him to retreat while his opponent asks who he thinks he's mocking. Out of nowhere, the old man is shot, has several other bullets fly toward Oscar's shield, which begins to crack, leaving him worried. We see that Jack is responsible. He says it's really a shame. If the boy had let his guard down just a bit more, he definitely would have been hit, revealing afterward that the old man was just a subordinate who could be easily replaced. In his thoughts, the protagonist remarks that's exactly why criminals are terrifying, then wonders what kind of weapon that is. Loading more bullets, the red-haired man says all Oscar needs to know is that the gun was very expensive. Oscar then asks if acceleration, enhancement, and penetration spells are imbued in the revolver. With a dark glare, Jack asks how he knew. Our boy then says he figured it out after failing to block the bullets. Smiling, the man says he's arrogant but still talented. He then asks if Oscar wouldn't like to work with him since the pay is good. Our boy declines, saying the back of his head would start itching. Agreeing, Jack says that in that case, there's no reason to keep talking. Crouched behind the fences, the protagonist wonders what kind of state this guy and the previous Tower Master are in, because he needs to find a way to escape even with his mana at half. The only opening he has is the reload delay on Jack's weapon, which takes 1.4 seconds. Staying to man-hunting him, he says all he needs to do is make Jack waste his last bullet before the next reload. He then decides to use his acceleration magic and dashes forward. Jack quickly notices the boy approaching and prepares to shoot again, declaring that no human can defeat the Trinity engraved in his weapon. As he fires, watching the projectile speed toward Oscar's shield, the red-haired man smiles, thinking it's over. But he doesn't realize that the protagonist is also preparing an attack with his wind bullets because Jack is too distracted reloading, still wondering how the boy dodged his shot. Suddenly, he notices the shield is gone, but it's too late. Oscar is already close enough to shoot him right between the eyes. All Jack can ask is how it's possible. The protagonist then says he wouldn't understand even if he heard the explanation. And so after defeating his opponent, he decides to inspect the revolver, which had been extremely irritating due to its triple enchantments. In his thoughts, the protagonist admits the weapon is incredible. The bullets only didn't pierce his shield because he reinforced it, reducing friction and increasing internal enhancement. But if that hadn't worked, he'd definitely be on the ground. So if he should research modern weapons more. Second priority, of course, is saving Frank and Ivan because he's certain there were 4 enemies. And since he's handled 3, 1 is still left. So all he can do is pray his friend holds out a little longer. We see the Bluebeard boy begging Ivan to get out of there since he won't be able to fight properly if he has to worry about him. Ivan agrees and stepping back asks the boy to be careful. In front of Frank, another man says he tells pretty little white lies. The boy then asks why his opponent didn't go after Ivan. Smiling, the yellow-eyed man asks what kind of person would stay behind just to survive alone. He then states that the old man is indeed his target, but he's always been curious about what's so special about a mage. So he wants to take Frank out first. He charges, but the blue-haired boy manages to dodge. Closing in again, the enemy says that was too easy, then asks the boy to do something bolder and show him why everyone fears the mages from the 4 great towers. As he successfully lands a stab, the man realizes something is wrong. Because it doesn't feel like striking a human, we see that Frank managed to catch his opponent's weapon with one hand and counter with the other. The man collapses to the ground with strawberry juice spilling from his mouth. Apologizing, the blue-haired boy says he has a bit of a unique condition. While showing clear surprise at what he just did and nearly stepping on the man when he moves forward, Oscar, who watched everything from hiding, realizes that Frank is a special kind of mage because he has the magic to transform part of his body into wind, which makes him immune to physical attacks. Amazed, he thinks to himself that he's only ever seen that rare magic in old books, in records that spoke about the 7th master of the magic tower, who was a special mage and possessed the same kind of power. Frank is startled when he sees the protagonist approaching. Oscar says he did a good job, then asks where he left Ivan. Panicking as he remembers the man, Frank starts yelling his name. Still in thought, Oscar reflects that if he trains Frank, the boy will develop a powerful skill that could rival dozens of great mages. As dawn breaks, we return to the old man's cabin, where Ivan, hugging the blue-haired boy, says that if it weren't for him, he'd have never seen the sunrise again. Agreeing, the protagonist says that if it weren't for Frank, things would have gotten really complicated, making the boy so shy he blushes. Frank asks if everything's over now, but Ivan says no, since Pole won't give up after just one attempt, especially with that being the best land in Surin. And because the fertility of other lands has drastically declined due to factories, if industry begins to grow near his fields, the day may come when resistance simply won't be worth it. Because if the soil becomes infertile, he won't be able to grow herbs anymore. Oscar then says he has a question to ask. He wants to know if a man is so loyal to the White Tower because of a promise he made to the 4th Master, Reynolds. Surprised, Ivan listens as the protagonist says that long ago, herbalists were viewed very differently. Regarded as witches, they lived nomadic lives to avoid being captured. Until one day, the 4th Master of the White Tower appeared and welcomed them, inviting them to come to Surin, which would be their eternal home, the place where no one would look down on them. Feeding modesty, Oscar says he read the story in a book. Smiling, Ivan says that after that, herbalists from across the continent began gathering in Surin, and that the White Tower gave them a home and pride in their people. That's why he could never abandon them. Bowing before the man, the protagonist thanks him for his years of service, saying the White Tower will stand by him from that moment forward. Ivan then says that if anything happens to him, the Imperial family will act, but he's unsure whether they'd arrive in time. Oscar tells him not to worry since the family will move as fast as light because that's the very day he's going to meet them to sign the vaccine agreement. Meanwhile, in Pole's office, we hear someone screaming from inside a room. While a group of individuals in dark uniforms tell someone not to move, we see that in front of Powell stands Senior Superintendent Walker from the Imperial Ministry of Internal Affairs. The man in the white suit is on the floor panic. Walker then informs him that he's under arrest for attempted murder, blackmail, and a long list of other crimes. Paul starts shouting, claiming he's innocent and that this is all a mistake, but Walker says they're the ones who'll be the judges. Sweet and cold, Paul realizes this isn't something he can handle alone. He needs to contact someone in particular. Trying to buy time, he asks for permission to smoke a cigar. Denied, Walker orders the guards to handcuff him and drag him out. Desperate, Paul yells that this is a mistake and asks Walker if he knows who's behind him. The superintendent replies that he doesn't, but if so, that person had better be stronger than the Emperor himself. Powell stops resisting and accepts being taken away. While the superintendent smokes his cigar, after all, criminals have good taste. Another guard approaches and asks who is responsible for pulling off an arrest like that in just one day. Walker says the order came from the top because the Emperor loves the White Tower, but this, he adds, is an adult matter. Looking out the window, the head of the army questions why his superior still has so much affection for the tower, given that the place lacks the capacity or the right to receive that kind of special treatment. Without taking his eyes off the window, he asks how old Dolan is. Approaching, the young man answers that he's 23, which means that 20 years ago he was 3, while Walker was 12, just old enough to witness. the moment when humanity gained true freedom after the victory in the war against the demons, all thanks to the existence of the White Tower. For this reason, his superiors still keep their expectations alive regarding the place. Turning around, the man informs the boy that they need to stop at one more place as the mission is not yet over, and now they must go west to issue an order to factories near the Balf River to prevent them from illegally dumping pollutants. Walker reveals in his thoughts that he just added this stop because even though he doesn't know the White Tower, this is his way of thanking the mages of the place for dealing with the gunslinger Jack's gang. We return to see the tower where Oscar and Frank are celebrating the victory. The protagonist says he's going to meet with the vice master of the tower and asks if his friend would like to come along, leaving him in a slight state of shock. Escaping, Frank says he has an appointment and says goodbye. Hamill approaches and asks if he saw the blue-haired boy there just seconds ago, and our boy confirms. He explains what happened and smiling, the old man says that, in any case, Oscar solved something big this time. So he would like to hear more about the mission in his quarters, and the boy says he was on his way there. They both head into the tower. Quickly, the protagonist realizes that something is wrong. Hamill then asks if he heard anything about Frank. Our boy denies it and asks what happened, and the old man says he received a message from the Sirius family. To inform that they accept the boy, confused, Oscar asks if the young man agreed to leave the White Tower. Hamill says he is not sure as the message said that negotiations would now be conducted with Frank, so he doesn't know the details. Next, we see the blue-haired young man in his room when someone knocks at the door. Upon hearing that they can come in, Oscar appears and asks who Grank is, the youngest son of the largest company in the Frank Sirius commercial empire, and what the young man is planning to do. Apologizing, Frank says he needs to return to his position in the company, then to marry someone he doesn't know, but who will help his family. The protagonist asks if the boy is okay with that, and he says yes. After all, the girl is pretty, kind, and from a noble family. Our boy then says he's not talking about the marriage, but rather about him giving up on magic. Packing his suitcase, Frank says he can't do anything. After all, even if he thought he was very special, he went to the weakest tower with very high ambitions. But he can't even support himself, so he understands his family's perspective and wanting him back in the company. Oscar calls the boy's attention, and he asks if it's because he said the White Tower was weak. However, our boy simply says that he is talented. The young man thanks him, but the protagonist insists that he's serious and asks if he'd like to try something to be ahead of the serpent. Suddenly, Frank's brother appears at the door, leaving him shocked. The man says he has 5 minutes and that he'll be waiting downstairs, so he can finish saying goodbye. Out of nowhere, our boy asks how much he wants to let the blue-haired boy stay. Turning around, the man asks who he thinks he is to ask that, and Oscar introduces himself. As the one responsible for creating the medicine, Frank's brother also introduces himself as Grank Sirius, the eldest son of the family. Without hesitation, our boy says he has a deal to propose, but the man says it's too reckless because a child cannot make a deal with the Sirius family. Standing tall, Oscar says he will make Frank one of the best mages of the White Tower within 2 years, which will be very good for the family. Without showing much reaction, Grank asks what the penalty will be in case of failure. The protagonist then says he will hand over the next 50 years of the vaccine and the flu medicine to his family, also ensuring that the vice master of the tower will be their notary. The white-haired man then asks why he's doing all this for Frank and if it's just out of friendship. Our boy then says that, obviously, it's because the young man is worthy. So he needs the boy to restore the reputation of the White Tower to what it was at its peak in no more than 5 years. Frank says that even though the boy is young, he doesn't seem so naive as a businessman, but that he will add a condition, even though he finds the offer good, since he values trust more than money and doesn't do business before someone proves their worth. So he would like to propose a duel between the boy and a level 5 knight, who is his guard, where he cannot use the sword IQ ability. Oscar realizes that Grank is not willing to give up on Frank. Leaving the room, the man says he will see him at noon tomorrow. Panicking, the blue-haired youth asks what they should do now and if there's still time to cancel. After all, his brother is only doing this because he wants to see Oscar get beaten out of anger. To Gus' surprise, the protagonist states that he thinks it's possible to win the duel, then asks the youth if he believes a level 4 mage could win. After all, it's possible to make a mage who has already established go from level 3 to level 4 in 24 hours. Since Grant didn't say he had to win alone, just prove his abilities. Therefore, he will turn Frank into a level 4 mage to secure his stay at the tower. We are taken to the training room on the 40th floor, where the blue-haired youth feels uncertain about the plan. Confident, Oscar simply asks the young man to maintain his natural body posture, and with his eyes closed, circulate mana throughout his body. Suddenly, Frank's hand begins to glow. Approaching, the protagonist points to strategic points, showing where the areas of mana loss occur when the youth performs the circulation process. Doubting, Frank asks if it's really possible to level up just by fixing this issue. Oscar says yes, and that it's something only 0.1% of Arsages care about, so his friends should practice every morning. Then Oscar overwhelms Frank with so many explanations. Even so, the young man says he understood. The protagonist then asks him to show the magic he used during the fight in the herb field. Apologizing, the mage says he can't, and not because of trust, but because he feels afraid. Haragos leaves our boy intrigued. Frank reveals that he once nearly died using that type of magic because as he grew up, he was increasingly pressured by his family and began searching for something no one else could do. That's how he discovered he could transform his entire body into wind, which would make him very powerful. However, after having a reckless thought and thinking he was ready, he ended up losing control and failed completely, which made his mana completely uncontrollable. His luck was that the Tower Master was passing by and prevented him from ceasing to exist. However, the sensation of his soul being shattered into hundreds of pieces still haunts him to this day, and he only used it during the fight because in dangerous situations, the ability activates automatically, which makes him feel pathetic. Oscar then says there's nothing pathetic about it since many mages face similar problems. But the simplest solution is for him to learn to control his mana in a way that doesn't demand so much from his level. Frank asks what the boy keeps drawing on the floor and if he's thinking about making a pact with a demon. Denying it, Oscar says that, actually, he is summoning a wind spirit to transplant it into the youth's body. After some time, we see that Frank agreed and is now shouting and called the wind spirit. However, nothing happens. The protagonist says the youth's affinity with spirits is really very poor. The mage then says he felt a breeze, but Oscar claims it was just his side. But he tells the boy not to be disappointed since few humans have spiritual affinity. Desperate, Frank asks what he'll do now if he can't even summon a spirit. The protagonist then says there's another way. Through a spirit summoning ceremony he learned when visiting the elf kingdom in his past life, he asked the youth to move aside because he is going to try. Positioning himself at the center of the circle, the protagonist states that the Spirit King will remember him. We discover that a long time ago, the ritual wasn't done in a training room, but in front of the largest tree in the world. When calling the spirit, a windstorm begins to form, forcing Frank to shield his face with his arms. Suddenly, the wind spirit appears and says that this is the first time in 27 years that Oscar has summoned him. Getting straight to the point, our boy says he'd like to make a contract and asks if the entity needs anything. However, the man says there's no need for such formality, then asks if the boy will form a bond of friendship with the highest level spirit, Celestin. The protagonist denies it and says he should have explained the situation earlier because it's not you who needs a spirit but rather the young man behind him. The next day in the duel hall, Grank asks if the tower's vice master slept well. He replies that he did and that he agrees with the contract since the cure's inventor is very stubborn. Stepping forward, Leslie Morgan introduces himself as a level 5 knight. The protagonist does the same and they shake hands. Explaining the duel, Grank states that the two young men must try to take each other's necklace. But if 5 minutes pass and no one wins, it will be considered that his knight has lost. Holding the necklace, Oscar says he's ready, but that he won't be the one fighting. Frank finally arrives at the hall, which leaves Grant quite confused. Explaining, Oscar says that the young man asked him to show his abilities, and he will do so through what he taught the blue-haired youth. With no way out, Frank's brother says it's his fault for not specifying that Oscar had to fight personally, but that he won't go easy. The protagonist then says that's fine. After all, a level 4 mage would do better than a level 2. Shocked, Grank asks how his brother leveled up in one day, but the boy states that it's part of his abilities. Irritated, the eldest son of the Sirius family orders his knight to give it everything he has, while Oscar tells Frank not to be afraid and to simply do what he learned the day before. Glancing sideways, the young man says he understands and that he will return victorious. Seeing the boy approaching, the knight says it's been a while since they last met. Without hesitation, Grant initiates the duel. We see that the blue-haired young man decided to make the first move, facing Leslie, who holds his sword firmly. In his thoughts, Frank wonders how the man has so much power even without using sword Kai ability. But now he can't give up even if he's scared out of his mind. Oscar gets nervous seeing his student's initial reaction and recalls when he stated he would need the boy and make the White Tower famous again, as well as when the young man saved Ivan. We see that Frank decides to cast his Wind Blade spell, stating in his mind that for the first time someone told him they needed him. So he must meet the expectations placed on him. While defending against the attack, Lastly thinks to himself that the boy has improved, wondering if that's what it feels like to face the sword control technique once used by the Eastern nation. Concluding soon after that, it's time to stop just observing. Seeing the knight charging at him, Frank wonders how he will block that blow, choosing to raise a hand made of wind. Surprised, Grank asks if Oscar used any forbidden method to make the boy grow like that, but the boy says he used a very safe and solid method. We return to the battle where Lastly states that Frank doesn't suit the battle mage style. So soon the moment will come when getting hurt will be a relief, as it will allow him to stay in the organization and never again be devoured by his own magic. Suddenly, Oscar says it's over, making Grank widen his eyes. Not understanding anything, the man wonders why the protagonist is smiling. We go back to the previous night when the spirit transplant had just ended and Frank was lying on the floor. Standing, Oscar says the boy needs to fully overcome his trauma to use the ability freely, but it's still possible to win if he uses 100% of the god of wind, since turning the body into wind isn't all that the wind god can do. Drawing on a chalkboard, our boy says that this is the true part of the superpower called unitization, which allows anything that touches the boy's body to spin, something he must hide until the end of the battle, since winning when everything seems lost is more exciting. We see that when Frank passed Lastly, he managed to use the trick and rip off the necklace, which leaves the knight in shock. Frank stares at the necklace with a red pendant, also showing disbelief at what he just did. Raising his arms, he shouts that he finally understands. Approaching, Grank thinks to himself that it can't be possible the boy managed to use the god of wind. Laughing, Hamel says the match is over and asks if the man agrees with the result. Oscar can only smile and wave to his friend, who got much stronger in just one day. Remembering that makes the eldest son of the Sirius family reflect, and he admits his defeat shortly after. The elder says it's a shame the boy came all this way just to leave so quickly, but Grank simply asks the old man to take good care of his brother. Looking at Frank, he says the boy has grown a bit. The young man pretends he didn't hear it, and the other tells him to just let it go. Everyone watches the duo walk away. Looking at his apprentice, Oscar says the boy really is a funny guy for pretending not to have heard the compliment. The next day, we see Frank in shock at the entrance of the training room, which looks more like the entrance to a prison. The protagonist says that a long time ago, that's exactly what it was. Not understanding, the blue-haired youth asks why he needs to do isolated training. Oscar then says it was a recommendation from Hamel, so the boy should use the opportunity to better absorb everything he's learned and stop acting like a baby because he's not going to die. With teary eyes, Frank asks if he's sure, and the protagonist says yes and says goodbye, closing the door right after while mentally apologizing since he was the one who requested the test. We're taken to the night after the duel when the protagonist asked the elder to put the young man into isolated training for 30 days. Smiling, the old man agrees since they'll need the boy in a month's time. As the company from Frank's family stated, it will now offer its entire distribution network for free from that point forward. In his thoughts, the protagonist states that the company needs to finalize the calculations quickly. Speaking out loud that this really is good news, Hamel then reveals he has a request, as you would like the protagonist to give a lecture. Oscar says it's not something he can't do, but he'd rather focus on the potion department at the moment. So he'd like to know if there's any specific reason why the tower's mages need to get stronger in a short period of time. The elder says the boy really catches on quickly and asks if he's heard of the Night of the Mage. We find out it's a day when all the mages from each tower gathered to display their knowledge and skills in harmony. However, in practice that never happened and everyone ended up fighting, which led to the cancellation of the event after a few years. Intrigued, Oscar asks if the Emperor is planning to bring the Night of the Mage back. Confirming, Hamel says the details will be announced at New Year, and he's concerned about the Black Tower, which wants to become one of the 4 main magical towers, thus putting the White Tower at risk. Nervous, the protagonist says he'll give the lecture with a strange expression. After the conversation, we see the boy on campus 36th floor of the Magic Tower, thinking about what he heard regarding the Black Tower and that the low-level spirit ceremony really was a stroke of genius. We return to the past at the moment when Oscar was speaking with the spirit, who was furious with the request. It was then that he revealed through magic that he was Oscar's sage. The Great Spirit narrows his eyes, then widens them when a female entity appears and asks who the boy is to make the Spirit King give an order. Bowing, the spirit says the entity permitted it, but that it will not be a contract. It will be a simple transplant. Also, she sent a message for Oscar not to forget his promise. In his thoughts, the protagonist says he will keep his word since he was able to save many from the White Tower thanks to her. So Gomini's sure to repay the favor with interest. But before that, he needs to take care of his family a little more. We see a red-haired boy happy to see a familiar face, then asking if that is a lecture for level 3 students. A young woman then says maybe he'll teach basic lessons. Another girl appears claiming that it might be true that the White Tower has more money now, and that this was the place where the Imperial observation seminar took place, so the speaker must be someone special. A voice then asks the girl not to make him laugh. It's Damien Proud, who clearly isn't very excited about the lecture. The pink-haired girl then says he's being too negative. The young man replies that if it were an important lecture, it would have prepared a high-level class just like the other towers. So if it were that important, the level 2 noble genius would be there too. Suddenly, a voice interrupts the conversation. Then the students are left speechless. Entering the room, Oscar says it's a pleasure to meet everyone and that from that moment on, he will be the teacher of magical reinterpretation. The students are left with their mouths open, while the protagonist says he knows many of them are disappointed that he's the speaker. We realize our boy hit the mark as we see the students' thoughts, furious and indignant. Oscar then says that they are no longer academy students under the control of teachers, but there is a condition. That is, everyone there must prove their ability by demonstrating that they don't need to learn within 10 minutes after stating their reason for not wanting to attend his classes. Thus, a very simple condition. A boy wonders if the young man is crazy for wanting to stop them from leaving without taking the test first, while the other students show signs of being furious. Damien concludes that, basically, Oscar is trying to convince them to take the course based on the fact that they are not capable. Meanwhile, the protagonist thinks to himself that he left a few gaps in the spell on purpose, but that doesn't mean it will be easy. After some time, we see that no one approached. Suddenly, the blonde boy yells from the back of the room that he succeeded, which surprises our boy since the young man had been listed among beginner-level mages. Even so, he stands and congratulates Damien. Other students begin to protest, but the protagonist says the test is over and that the only one who passed was the blonde boy. Smiling, the boy says that in that case he doesn't need to take the class, and Oscar confirms it. However, we see that Damien has grown curious about what will be taught in the upcoming lessons. Sitting back down, the protagonist says he will give the young man a prize for being the only one to pass, then asks what spell he likes the most. Without hesitation, Damien says his wind cutter. Oscar then asks him to demonstrate it. After doing what was asked, the blonde boy asks if that's enough. Smiling, our boy says it's cool, but he will now teach him the real wind cutter, because by his standards, that execution is, at best, a very poor version. There are two main problems. Damien is surprised when one of his blades is stopped with just one hand. Oscar then says that first that spell isn't made of wind, and he wants to know what the boy thinks wind is. Embarrassed, the mage says it's moving air. Saying he's wrong, the protagonist explains that air is only wind if it's moving and flowing continuously. So what Damien did wasn't wind cutter because air that doesn't flow quickly loses its shape just like the White Tower's magic, which causes the cutter to be destroyed forever. Addressing the second problem, Oscar says it would be more useful if the boy reduced the amount of mana he uses to cast the spell, revealing that one can learn a lot about a person just by the way they use magic, including their past. For example, if Damien is from the Proud family, he must have seen their magic while growing up and started copying it even without having the required level, which led him to use more mana than necessary to cast Wind Cutter, a habit that stuck with him until now. Now that he has the chance to fix those issues, it's a shame he doesn't want to take the classes. The young man, in turn, seems to have changed his mind as he turns back toward his seat. 3 weeks later, we see someone talking about certain rumors, saying that Oscar is a complete star instructor, being helpful even for level 4 and 5 mages despite starting out teaching lower level ones. A boy asked if he should go to the classes too, while another says he was just waiting for him to ask that because they need to line up in advance to get in. After the conversation, several mages get up, and in the classroom we see that the session is packed, including Maxim, who is sitting in a chair at the back. Oscar arrives and greets everyone, revealing that the spell for today's class is very important, so it's good to see a full room. Because he will teach the spell that mages believe is the most important, in this case the wind spell. Hearing this kills the students' excitement as that spell is the most basic of all, something even non-White Tower members can learn. Maxim raises his hand and asks if Oscar is serious about teaching that even after gathering so many people. Boldly, the protagonist asks the elder to demonstrate the spell. Quickly, the man obeys and summons a gust of wind that messes up everyone's hair. After thanking him, our boy calls for Amy, then asks the girl to do the same spell. Even without understanding why she was chosen, the girl casts the spell, which reaches the boys' faces gently and warmly. Oscar then asks if anyone there knows the difference between the two spells, prompting several students to give their guesses. However, the one who gets it right is Veronica, who had been quietly sitting at the back and spoke very softly. The protagonist confirms that, as the girl said, the difference in the spells lies in the mana temperament. Even though the process of forming and casting the magic was the same, one was warm and the other was gentle, which means it wasn't the same wind. Picking up a piece of chalk, the protagonist asks who there understands what mana temperament is. He states that to understand the concept, it's necessary to learn about the roots of the White Tower. In other words, the balance that also represents the Blue Tower. Unlike the Red and Golden Towers, which are strong and fast and therefore not harmonious. However, there are conditions that differentiate the White Tower from the Blue Tower, such as, for example, the conditions required for water to boil, which is quite simple. But even simpler is producing warm wind, which more easily blends with the environment and transforms like a chameleon. Suddenly, all the students begin to feel cold. Oscar then says that wind is freer than any element capable of creating a force as strong as the flames of the Red Tower, as fast as the lightning of the Golden Tower, or possessing a form as free as the water of the Blue Tower. Thus, only wind can be harmonious with anything in the world, which means that mages of the White Tower must always pay attention to the nature of their wind. After finishing the explanation, Oscar states the core focus of the lesson, the kind of entity everyone there believes wind to be. Suddenly, something catches our boy's attention. We can see that something is wrong with Maxim. Desperately, Oscar tells everyone not to touch the elder.
Alright, that's the end of the story. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.